He was washing his face in a McDonald's bathroom at 3 a.m., hoping no one would notice he'd been sleeping there. Today, he makes $87,000 a week and owns a company that employs over 200 people. Thomas Rivera had everything mapped out at 32. Senior marketing director at a tech firm in Austin, Texas. A downtown apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows. A savings account that made him feel secure. He was the guy his friends called when they needed career advice. The one who seemed to have it all figured out. But success built on someone else's foundation is fragile. When the company restructured in late 2019, Thomas found himself in the CEO's office on a Thursday morning, listening to words that would shatter his carefully constructed life. "We're eliminating your position. It's nothing personal." 24 hours to clear out his desk. 12 years of climbing the corporate ladder, reduced to a cardboard box of personal items. The severance package seemed generous at first. 3 months' salary. Enough time to find something new, right? Thomas attacked his job search with the same intensity he'd brought to his marketing campaigns. He updated his LinkedIn profile, reached out to his network, sent out dozens of applications. His confidence remained intact through the first month. By the second month, the rejections started piling up. Overqualified. Looking for someone younger. Position has been filled. The third month arrived with a brutal reality check. His savings were depleting faster than he'd calculated. The severance money was gone. His downtown apartment, once a symbol of success, became a monthly burden he couldn't carry. Thomas made the painful call to his landlord, explaining his situation, asking for more time. The response was cold but fair. "I'm sorry, but I have bills too." Moving back in with his parents wasn't an option. His father had made it clear years ago that success meant standing on your own feet, and asking for help was admitting failure. His mother had passed away 3 years earlier, taking with her the one person who might have opened their door without judgment. His sister lived across the country with her own family, her own struggles. Thomas had always been the independent one, the achiever. Reaching out felt like betraying everything he'd built his identity around. The eviction notice came on a Tuesday. 30 days to vacate. Thomas spent those 30 days sending out more applications, making more calls, growing more desperate with each passing hour. He started applying for positions far below his experience level. Retail jobs, restaurant work, anything that would provide immediate income. But his resume worked against him now. Employers saw his background and assumed he'd leave the moment something better came along. On his last night in the apartment, Thomas sat on the floor, surrounded by boxes he couldn't afford to move. His furniture would stay behind. His carefully curated life reduced to what could fit in his car. He'd sold his expensive watch, his laptop, anything of value to buy himself a few more weeks. But those weeks had run out. The first night in his car was the hardest. Thomas parked behind a 24-hour gym, thinking he could use their bathroom facilities and maybe even shower if he got a day pass. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by every sound, every passing car. His back ached from the cramped position. His mind raced with possibilities, plans, hope that tomorrow would bring a breakthrough. But tomorrow brought more of the same. More rejections, more closed doors, and the growing realization that his car wasn't a temporary solution anymore. It was becoming home. The gym membership became Thomas's lifeline and his greatest expense. $49 a month he couldn't afford, but it meant access to showers, clean bathrooms, and a few hours where he could pretend to be normal. He'd arrive early in the morning, work out just enough to justify his presence, then spend the day in coffee shops with free Wi-Fi, applying for jobs on his phone. The coffee shops started recognizing him. The same man, every day, nursing a single cup of coffee for hours while hunched over his phone. Eventually, the looks became uncomfortable. The silent message clear. Buy something else or leave. Thomas learned to rotate between locations, never staying too long in one place. His car became a mobile office and bedroom. He kept his few remaining dress shirts hanging in the back, wrinkled but clean. His laptop charger stayed plugged into the cigarette lighter. Fast food parking lots became his conference rooms for phone interviews. He'd sit in the driver's seat, trying to sound confident and successful while surrounded by the evidence of his failure. The job interviews were the cruelest part. Thomas would clean up in the gym, put on his best shirt, and walk into office buildings where he'd once belonged. He'd shake hands with hiring managers, smile confidently, and answer questions about his career gap with rehearsed explanations. Taking time to find the right opportunity. Consulting independently while exploring options. Lies that felt necessary, but ate away at what remained of his self-respect. One interview particularly broke him. A marketing position at a mid-size company. Exactly what he was looking for. The hiring manager seemed impressed, asking detailed questions about his experience. Thomas felt hope building for the first time in months. Then came the final question. So, where are you living now? Still in the downtown area? Thomas's mind went blank. He couldn't admit he was homeless. The lie came easily. I'm between places right now, staying with friends while I look for the right neighborhood. The hiring manager's expression shifted slightly. Something in Thomas's tone, maybe his desperation, gave him away. The rejection email came 2 days later. We've decided to go with another candidate. Thomas read it while sitting in a McDonald's parking lot at midnight, trying to work up the courage to ask if he could use their bathroom to wash up. The weight of months of rejection, of pretending, of slowly losing pieces of himself, finally crashed down. That night, he didn't even try to sleep in the car. He walked to a nearby park and sat on a bench until sunrise, staring at the city skyline where he'd once imagined building his future. The distance between where he was and where he'd been felt impossible to bridge. Every job rejection felt personal now. Every closed door confirmed what he was starting to believe about himself. Maybe he really wasn't worth hiring. Maybe his success had been luck, and now the universe was correcting itself. His phone battery died that morning, and he didn't have the energy to find a place to charge it. For the first time since losing his job, Thomas went an entire day without applying for work, without checking emails, without pretending he was anything other than a man whose life had completely fallen apart. The second night in the park, a security guard approached him. "You can't sleep here, buddy. There are shelters downtown if you need help." Thomas nodded and moved along, but the word shelter felt like admitting defeat. He wasn't ready for that level of surrender. Not yet. Winter was approaching, and sleeping in the car was becoming dangerous. Austin's nights could drop into the 30s, and his old sedan's heater only worked when the engine was running. Thomas couldn't afford to idle the car all night, burning gas he couldn't replace. The math was simple and brutal. He was running out of options. The downtown library became his daytime refuge. Free Wi-Fi, warm building, bathrooms, and the anonymity of being surrounded by other people who had nowhere else to go. Thomas discovered he wasn't alone in using the library as a shelter from his circumstances. There were others, veterans, families, elderly people, all trying to maintain dignity while everything else crumbled around them. But the library closed at 6 p.m. The long hours between closing time and opening the next morning stretched endlessly. Thomas developed a routine born of necessity. Fast food restaurants with late hours, 24-hour grocery stores, hospital waiting rooms where he could sit without being questioned. He became an expert at looking like he belonged somewhere, even when he had no right to be there. His appearance started deteriorating despite his efforts. The same 3 shirts, rotated and re-washed in gym sinks. His shoes, once polished leather, now showed wear and weather damage. His car accumulated the smell of someone living in too small a space. A mixture of fast food, unwashed clothes, and desperation that no amount of air freshener could mask. The worst moment came during a phone interview for a sales position. Thomas was parked behind a Target, windows cracked for air circulation, when his phone rang. The hiring manager launched into questions about his background, his availability, his salary expectations. Everything was going well until a group of teenagers walked by, saw him sitting in his car, and decided to have some fun. They started banging on his windows, laughing and shouting. Thomas tried to continue the interview while frantically starting his car to drive away, but the hiring manager heard the commotion. "Is everything all right? Where are you calling from?" "I'm sorry. I'm having some technical difficulties," Thomas managed, but the damage was done. The interview ended quickly, and he never heard back. That night, Thomas sat in his car in an empty parking lot and made a list of everyone he could call for help. His sister in California, but they hadn't spoken in 2 years after a family argument. His college roommate, But Thomas had lost touch when success made him feel superior to old friendships, his former colleagues, but asking for help from people who still had what he'd lost felt impossible. The list remained empty. Thomas realized his climb up the corporate ladder had been solitary. He'd focused so intensely on individual achievement that he'd never built the kind of relationships that survive failure. Success had isolated him, and now that isolation was complete. His father's voice echoed in his memory. Stand on your own feet. Asking for help is admitting failure. Thomas had internalized that message so completely that even facing homelessness, he couldn't bring himself to reach out. Pride wasn't just preventing his recovery, it was accelerating his descent. By December, Thomas had been living in his car for 4 months. The job search had become mechanical, empty motions he went through, because stopping meant accepting that this was permanent. His savings were gone. His credit cards were maxed out. His car needed repairs he couldn't afford. And for the first time since losing his job, Thomas started to understand that rock bottom wasn't just about losing everything you had. It was about losing faith that anything would ever get better. Thomas was washing his hands in a McDonald's bathroom at 2:47 a.m. when he saw his reflection and didn't recognize himself. 6 months of living in his car had hollowed out his cheeks, put dark circles under his eyes, and stripped away everything he'd once considered essential to his identity. He looked like the homeless men he used to step around on downtown sidewalks, the ones he'd assumed had made bad choices or lacked ambition. The McDonald's had become his regular late-night stop. The staff knew him by now. The quiet guy who bought a $1 coffee and used the bathroom to clean up. They never hassled him, probably understanding his situation without words being exchanged. But that night, something was different. As Thomas dried his face with paper towels, he overheard a conversation from the kitchen. "Did you see that guy who comes in here every night? I think he's living in his car." "Yeah, I noticed. Seems like a decent person, though. Always polite, never causes trouble." Makes you think, doesn't it? Could happen to anyone. The words hit Thomas like cold water. Could happen to anyone. For months, he'd been carrying shame like a weight, believing his situation was proof of some fundamental failure in himself. But hearing those workers, people who probably earned minimum wage and understood financial struggle, express empathy instead of judgment, shifted something inside him. Thomas walked back to his car and sat in the driver's seat. But instead of trying to sleep, he really looked at his situation for the first time in months. He'd been so focused on getting back to where he was before that he'd never considered that maybe his old life hadn't been as solid as he'd believed. Maybe losing everything wasn't the end of his story. Maybe it was clearing away what wasn't working to make room for something better. The next morning, Thomas made a decision that felt both terrifying and liberating. Instead of spending the day applying for jobs that never responded, he drove to a construction site he'd passed dozens of times. A sign out front advertised day labor. Cash paid daily. No experience necessary. Thomas had never done manual labor in his life, but his bank account had been overdrawn for 3 weeks. Pride was a luxury he could no longer afford. The foreman looked Thomas up and down. Soft hands, pale skin. Clearly not a construction worker. "You sure about this, college boy? This isn't office work." "I'm sure," Thomas replied, and meant it. The work was brutal. Thomas spent 8 hours moving concrete blocks, his back screaming, his hands blistering despite the borrowed gloves. But at the end of the day, the foreman handed him $80 in cash. Real money. Immediate money. Money that meant he could buy gas and food without calculating every penny. More importantly, Thomas discovered something he'd forgotten during months of rejection. He was capable of more than he'd given himself credit for. The other workers on the site didn't care about his resume or his career gap. They cared about whether he showed up, worked hard, and pulled his weight. For the first time in months, Thomas felt useful. That night, instead of parking behind a business and trying to become invisible, Thomas drove to a hilltop overlooking the city. He used his day's earnings to buy actual groceries instead of fast food, and ate a real meal while watching the sunset. The physical exhaustion felt different from the emotional exhaustion that had been consuming him. His body was tired, but his mind felt clearer than it had in months. The second day of construction work was easier. His muscles remembered the movements, and the crew started including him in their conversations. These men had their own struggles, family problems, financial pressures, health issues. But they approached challenges with a practical mindset Thomas had lost somewhere in his corporate career. Problems were meant to be solved, not overthought. "You're not like most college guys who come through here," said Rico, a veteran worker who'd become an unofficial mentor. "Most of them think they're too good for this work, just marking time until something better comes along." "You actually listen." Thomas realized Rico was right. He was listening, not just to instructions about the work, but to how these men approached life. They didn't waste energy on shame or regret. They focused on what they could control, showing up, working hard, taking care of their families. It was a mindset Thomas had abandoned when success made him believe he was above basic struggles. After 2 weeks of construction work, Thomas had earned enough to get his car repaired and pay for a week in a cheap motel room. The room was tiny, the carpet was stained, and the air conditioning barely worked. But it had a bed, a shower, and a door he could lock. Thomas lay on the lumpy mattress that first night and felt something he'd almost forgotten: hope. The construction job was temporary, but it had given Thomas more than money. It had returned his sense of capability, his belief that he could adapt and survive. More importantly, it had connected him with people who didn't define him by his past success or current failures, but by his willingness to show up and contribute. That week in the motel room, Thomas made a list. Not of jobs to apply for, but of skills he'd gained during his months of survival: resourcefulness, adaptability, humility, the ability to function under pressure. These weren't the skills featured on his old resume, but they were the skills that had kept him alive when everything else fell apart. For the first time since losing his job, Thomas started thinking about moving forward instead of trying to go back. The construction foreman offered Thomas a permanent position after 3 weeks of day labor, but Thomas surprised himself by declining. Not because he thought he was above the work. Those weeks had taught him that honest labor carried its own dignity. But during his lunch breaks, while the other workers rested, Thomas had been observing something that sparked an idea. Every day, food trucks lined up outside construction sites, office buildings, and busy intersections. Thomas watched workers spend $8 to $15 on lunch, often complaining about the quality or limited options. He saw office workers walking blocks to find decent food, wasting their lunch hours in lines. A problem was staring him in the face, and for the first time in months, his old marketing instincts stirred to life. Thomas spent his evenings in the motel room researching food truck businesses. He learned about permits, health department requirements, startup costs, and profit margins. The numbers were daunting. A decent used food truck cost between $30,000 and $50,000. Thomas had less than $1,000 in savings from his construction work. But instead of being discouraged, he started thinking creatively. What if he didn't need a truck right away? What if he could test his concept with minimal investment? Thomas remembered reading about ghost kitchens, commercial kitchen spaces that entrepreneurs could rent by the hour to prepare food for delivery. Austin had several, designed for people starting food businesses without the capital for full restaurant build-outs. The rental fees were manageable, $50 for a 4-hour block, including access to professional equipment and meeting health department standards. The idea crystallized during a particularly busy lunch rush at a construction site. Thomas watched workers stand in line for 20 minutes at an overpriced food truck, then eat mediocre sandwiches while complaining about the wait. That night, he developed his business plan on paper napkins in his motel room. The concept was simple: prepare high-quality, affordable meals in a ghost kitchen, then deliver them directly to construction sites, office buildings, and businesses during lunch hours. No overhead for a food truck, no waiting in lines for customers, just good food, fairly priced, delivered fresh. Thomas invested his construction earnings in the basics: a business license, liability insurance, and his first ghost kitchen rental. He designed a simple menu based on what he'd learned workers actually wanted: substantial portions, familiar flavors, reasonable prices. Nothing fancy, but made with care and consistency. His first day of food preparation was humbling. Thomas had always been competent in his own kitchen, but cooking for 50 people in an unfamiliar commercial setup tested every skill he thought he had. He burned the first batch of rice, under-seasoned the chicken, and realized too late that his portions were inconsistent. But he adapted, adjusted, and by the end of the 4-hour session, he had 45 lunch containers ready for delivery. The next morning, Thomas loaded his car with insulated bags and drove to the construction site where he'd worked. The crew greeted him with curiosity and skepticism. "Rivera's trying to feed us now? This should be interesting." But when they tasted the food, seasoned chicken and rice bowls with fresh vegetables for $6 each, the skepticism disappeared. "This is actually good, man. Way better than that truck that comes around here." Thomas sold 37 meals that first day. After calculating his costs, ingredients, kitchen rental, gas for delivery, he'd made a profit of $43. Not enough to live on, but proof that the concept worked. Word spread faster than Thomas expected. Workers at other construction sites started asking when he'd be coming around. Office managers heard about the delivery service and requested catering for their teams. Thomas found himself booking the ghost kitchen 3 days a week, then 5, then starting to look for additional kitchen space to meet demand. The physical demands were exhausting. Thomas would wake at 5 a.m. to prep ingredients, spend 4 hours cooking, then drive around the city making deliveries until 3 p.m. But unlike the soul-crushing exhaustion of unemployment, this tiredness came with purpose and visible progress. 3 months after starting his delivery service, Thomas was making enough to move from the motel to a small apartment. Nothing fancy, a studio with basic furniture. But it was his first real home since losing his downtown place. The night he got his keys, Thomas sat on his new couch and realized something profound. He wasn't trying to get back to his old life anymore. He was building something entirely new. The business kept growing through word of mouth and simple execution. Thomas maintained his focus on quality and reliability. Meals ready on time, consistent flavors, fair prices. He started building relationships with his regular customers, learning their preferences, adapting his menu based on their feedback. By month 6, Thomas had hired his first employee, Maria, a single mother who needed flexible hours and reliable income. Teaching someone else his systems forced Thomas to think more strategically about the business. He developed standardized recipes, efficient prep procedures, and delivery routes that maximized time and fuel efficiency. The ghost kitchen operator noticed Thomas's success and offered him a partnership opportunity. Other entrepreneurs were struggling to make their food businesses work, but Thomas had cracked the code of consistent profitability. The operator wanted Thomas to mentor other tenants in exchange for reduced kitchen fees and priority booking. Thomas accepted and suddenly found himself in an unexpected role, business consultant. The skills he'd developed during his corporate career, strategic thinking, process optimization, market analysis, combined with the practical knowledge he'd gained from months of hands-on operation, made him uniquely qualified to help others avoid common pitfalls. But the real transformation wasn't in Thomas's bank account or business growth. It was in how he saw himself. The man who'd once defined his worth by job titles and salary figures now measured success by the satisfaction of his customers, the reliability of his service, and the steady progress of building something sustainable from nothing. 18 months after Thomas started his food delivery service from a motel room, he was facing a problem he'd never expected: too much demand. His small operation was booking every available hour at 3 different ghost kitchens. He'd hired 4 employees, and he was still turning away potential customers every week. The business had grown beyond what he could manage with his original simple model. The breakthrough came during a conversation with Jake, the owner of the ghost kitchen facility. "You know, Thomas, I've seen dozens of food businesses come through here. Most fail within 6 months, but you've figured out something they haven't." "What's that?" Thomas asked, genuinely curious. He'd been so focused on day-to-day operations that he hadn't stepped back to analyze his own success. "You treat this like a systems business, not a food business." "Most people who rent my kitchens are chefs trying to be entrepreneurs. You're an entrepreneur who happened to choose food." That conversation sparked the insight that would transform Thomas's small delivery service into something much larger. He wasn't just selling meals, he was selling a proven system for connecting quality food with underserved markets. And that system could be replicated. Thomas spent the next month documenting everything he'd learned through trial and error. He created detailed manuals covering menu development, cost calculation, supplier relationships, delivery logistics, customer acquisition, and quality control. What had started as napkin notes in a motel room became a comprehensive business methodology. The numbers told the story. Thomas's average food cost was 28% of revenue, compared to the industry standard of 35 to 40%. His customer retention rate was 87%, while most food delivery services struggled to keep customers beyond their first few orders. His delivery efficiency allowed him to serve 40% more customers per hour than traditional food trucks. But the real competitive advantage was simpler. Thomas understood his customers because he'd been one of them. He knew what construction workers wanted for lunch because he'd been hungry on construction sites. He understood office workers' frustrations with limited food options because he'd walked those same blocks looking for decent meals during his job search. The expansion strategy emerged naturally. Instead of trying to scale his own operation indefinitely, Thomas would license his system to other entrepreneurs. He'd provide the training, systems, and ongoing support, while they provided local market knowledge and hands-on execution. Thomas's first licensee was Maria, his employee who'd expressed interest in starting her own delivery route. Thomas provided her with his complete operational manual, helped her secure ghost kitchen space, and taught her his methods for building customer relationships. Within 3 months, Maria was operating a profitable route serving the east side of Austin. The success with Maria proved the model could work. Thomas refined his training program and started recruiting other licensees, people with hustle and customer service skills who needed a proven system to build their own businesses. He charged a $15,000 licensing fee plus 5% of ongoing revenue. The licensing fee covered training, initial marketing support, and operational systems. The ongoing percentage ensured Thomas remained invested in each licensee's success. But Thomas made a crucial decision that separated his approach from typical franchise models. Instead of requiring licensees to follow rigid corporate procedures, he encouraged them to adapt his core systems to their local markets. A licensee serving tech companies might offer lighter, health-conscious options. Another serving warehouse districts might focus on heartier, more filling meals. The system was flexible enough to accommodate different customer bases while maintaining the fundamental principles that made it profitable. Within 6 months, Thomas had 12 active licensees across Texas. Each operation was generating between $4,000 and $8,000 in monthly profit for its operator, while Thomas earned licensing fees and ongoing royalties totaling $32,000 monthly. But more importantly, he was creating sustainable livelihoods for people who, like him, needed more than just a job. They needed ownership of their own success. The administrative demands of managing a growing network of licensees forced Thomas to hire support staff and rent office space. He brought on Elena, a former restaurant manager, to handle licensee training and support. He hired David, an accountant who specialized in small business systems, to manage the financial reporting and compliance requirements. Thomas kept his own delivery route active 1 day a week, partly to stay connected to the customer experience, and partly because he genuinely enjoyed the direct satisfaction of serving people good food. By the end of his 2nd year in business, Thomas's network included 23 active licensees in 4 states. His personal income had reached $87,000 per month. But the transformation went beyond financial success. Thomas had created a business that solved real problems, feeding people quality meals at fair prices, while providing entrepreneurial opportunities for operators who might not otherwise have access to proven business systems. The method that had taken Thomas from sleeping in his car to earning over $1 million annually wasn't complicated or revolutionary. It was built on principles he'd learned during his darkest months. Understand your customers' real needs. Deliver consistent value. Build systems that don't depend on your personal presence and help others succeed alongside you. Most importantly, Thomas had learned that true security didn't come from climbing someone else's corporate ladder. It came from creating value that people willingly paid for, building systems that could operate without constant supervision, and developing multiple income streams that weren't dependent on a single employer's decisions. Thomas stands in his downtown Austin office on a Tuesday morning, looking out at the city where he once slept in his car. 3 years have passed since that desperate night washing his face in a McDonald's bathroom. The view from his 32nd floor window encompasses the construction sites, office buildings, and parking lots that became his university during the hardest period of his life. The office itself tells the story of how far he's traveled. Clean lines, comfortable furniture, but nothing ostentatious. The wall behind his desk displays not awards or certificates, but a map dotted with pins showing the locations of his 93 active licensees across 12 states. Each pin represents someone who took his system and built their own version of success with it. Thomas's phone buzzes with a text from Carlos, his newest licensee in Phoenix. Week 3 numbers: 347 meals served, $2,100 profit. Thank you for believing in me. Messages like this arrive daily from operators across his network. Former teachers, laid-off factory workers, military veterans, single parents, people who needed more than employment. They needed ownership. The business has evolved beyond what Thomas imagined during those early days in the ghost kitchen. His company, Fresh Root Systems, now generates $127,000 in weekly revenue. But the numbers tell only part of the story. The real measure of success is the ecosystem he's created. 93 independent operators earning sustainable livings, 400 plus employees across the network, and thousands of customers who get better food at fair prices because someone cared enough to bring it directly to them. Thomas still operates one delivery route himself every Friday. It's inefficient from a business perspective. His time is worth more spent on strategic planning or licensee development, but those Fridays keep him connected to the foundation of everything he's built. He delivers meals to some of the same construction sites where he once worked, serves office buildings where he once interviewed unsuccessfully, and maintains relationships with customers who knew him when he was just the guy trying to make an honest living, selling lunch from his car. The conversation that changed Thomas's perspective happened 6 months ago during a licensee conference in Dallas. Janet, a former retail manager who'd built a successful operation serving hospital staff, approached him after his presentation. "I need to tell you something," she said. "When I lost my job last year, I was ready to give up. 52 years old, no college degree, competing with people half my age for positions that paid half what I used to make. Your system didn't just give me a way to earn money, it gave me back my self-respect." Thomas realized that night that his real product wasn't food delivery systems. It was hope paired with practical action. He'd created a bridge between where people were and where they wanted to be. But more importantly, he'd proven that the bridge could be crossed. The lessons Thomas shares now, when speaking at entrepreneurship conferences or mentoring new licensees, are distilled from those months of desperation. Rock bottom taught me that security isn't about having the right job or the right boss. It's about developing skills that create value regardless of circumstances. Every setback contains information about what doesn't work, which is just as valuable as knowing what does work. He's learned to reframe failure as data collection. The months of job rejections weren't proof of his inadequacy. They were evidence that he was pursuing the wrong strategy. Living in his car wasn't a personal failure. It was an extreme education in resourcefulness and adaptability. The construction work wasn't beneath his abilities. It was the foundation for understanding his customer base. Thomas's daily routine reflects the balance he's found between ambition and contentment. He wakes at 5:30 a.m., not to frantically prep food in a ghost kitchen, but to spend an hour reading and planning before his team starts their day. He reviews licensee performance reports over coffee, looking for patterns that might help struggling operators or opportunities to expand successful strategies. His Tuesday morning staff meetings focus on problem solving rather than profit maximization. When a licensee in Oklahoma reports that construction customers are requesting breakfast options, Thomas and his team develop a morning menu and delivery schedule that can be adapted by other operators. When Elena identifies quality control issues at a location in Colorado, they create additional training materials and support systems to prevent similar problems elsewhere. The wealth Thomas has accumulated, 7 figures in business equity, investment accounts, and real estate, provides security. But it's not the security he once thought he wanted. Instead of protecting him from uncertainty, his success has taught him to embrace uncertainty as the natural state of entrepreneurship. The difference is that now he has systems, skills, and relationships that can adapt to whatever challenges emerge. Thomas keeps 3 items from his homeless period on his office desk. The torn McDonald's receipt from the night he decided to try construction work, a photo of his first food delivery setup in his beat-up sedan, and a small notebook where he recorded every customer's feedback during his early weeks of operation. These aren't trophies of how far he's come, but reminders of the mindset that got him here. Paying attention to what people actually need, focusing on what he could control, and refusing to let circumstances define his capabilities. The most profound change in Thomas's life is his relationship with failure and success. He no longer views them as permanent states, but as temporary conditions that provide different types of valuable information. Success teaches you what's possible. Failure teaches you what's necessary. Both are required for sustained growth. When Thomas locks his office and heads home each evening, he drives past the McDonald's where his transformation began. Sometimes he stops for a coffee, not because he needs it, but to maintain perspective on how quickly circumstances can change and how much control we actually have over our responses to those changes. End of the story. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories of overcoming.